Hey guys, Will or Lolio here, and today I'm showing you Bloodmaul Slag Mines, the first dungeon in Warlords of Draenor. So unlike Blackrock Spire and Shadowmoon Burial Grounds, this is a leveling dungeon, so for the purposes of testing, we're all scaled to level 91 with a 500 item level. My first impression of this dungeon is that it's a lot easier than the other two that I've done. Blackrock Spire felt tuned fairly well, while Shadowmoon is nearly impossible with a random group right now. Bloodmaul, on the other hand, feels slightly undertuned, even accounting for it being a leveling dungeon where things are meant to be pretty easy. There are a lot of mechanics, but most of them didn't seem to need any strategy or coordination, at least on normal mode. My guess is that on heroic or challenge mode, this is going to be a grey dungeon with a lot of nuance and quite a bit of difficulty. Visually, it's rather typical, but it's still impressive, I guess. Obviously the models and the textures, they're all brand new and they look great, with a lot of nice spell effects, but the general theme of the dungeon, not exactly groundbreaking. It reminds me a lot of the Blackrock dungeons, especially Blackrock Caverns. I wouldn't say that's necessarily a bad thing, and you definitely get the savage vibe that Blizzard is going for here. I think that since we have other dungeons like Shadowmoon to break up the visual vibe enough, I think that as long as we have stuff like that to make it so it's not orange, fire, orc, ogre, rock stuff all the time, we're okay. And so while this theme is used a lot, it's not necessarily bad. The trash in this place is made up of ogres, mostly big melee guys, with a few casters spread around. You've got the standard frontal cone smash, which seems to be in every dungeon this expansion. Nearly every trash pack and every boss has some sort of frontal cone. It's easy enough to avoid, but this one stuns you if you're hit, so make sure to watch out for that. It's definitely more of a threat if you're doing big pulls, which you can do because the mobs don't hit very hard, so if you're pulling, 3 or 4 at a time, make sure to avoid that. The casters have some interruptible abilities, but at this difficulty level I didn't notice much of a difference when we interrupted them as opposed to when we didn't, but it is always good practice to interrupt, so I recommend doing it. I do wish the spells felt a bit more meaningful. The dungeon is non-linear, which is always nice. We haven't had a lot of non-linearity in dungeons for quite some time now, and that means you can pick which boss you want to go to first. But every group I've been with has gone for Slave Watcher Crushtoe first. He's a pretty straightforward guy, not overly difficult. The main mechanic here is his ferocious yell ability, definitely the most important thing to look out for, and really it just requires a simple interrupt. If you don't interrupt him, it's going to buff his damage by 10% for 20 seconds, and I believe it stacks. And it also activates some of the enslaved miners that are around the room to attack your group. As a tank, if these do activate, your goal is to pick them up, but when Crushtoe does his Crushing Leap ability, all the ads are going to focus on to whoever got hit by it, and you can't taunt them off like they're totally focused, and you can't do anything, so healers are going to have to watch for that. And really, that's about it. Pretty simple boss, but it is engaging and, visually it looks cool enough to be the first boss of the expansion. I think it's nice. Nice little introduction. The trash to the second boss is basically more the same. There's more casters here, I believe. Really, the coolest part of this is when you approach the second boss, and you can see a lot of the ogres running out of the room, and they're all on fire, and they're all falling down and dying. Events like that, the little scripted things that you see, I think those are always nice. I would like to have more of those in dungeons. The second boss is a two-phase fight. So first you're going to fight Forge Master Gogda, who's an ogre caster mob, and then you fight Magmolitus, a big fire elemental. So the Forge Master channels a spell that puts down lava pools around the room. There's plenty of time to avoid them, so just move out of them if they get under you. It's not really an issue. He also summons two elementals, Ruination and Calamity. Ruination has a frontal cone, how innovative, and lays down spikes you want to avoid. Calamity has a dispellable dot that jumps to other players, which you want to definitely dispel, and two interruptible abilities. The trick here is to make sure you interrupt Firestorm instead of Scorch, because Firestorm does a lot more damage, whereas Scorch is just like a one-player nuke that goes on the tank. Once the Forge Master is dead, Magmolitus comes out. He has a large ground AoE with a long cast time. That's probably the most noticeable thing he does, so as long as you move out of it, you're not going to be stunned, and there's not going to be much damage going out. There is also a dot that needs to be dispelled, similar to the first phase, and he calls down a meteor that you want to avoid, which it summons a fire elemental ad, and these do have some abilities, but they're not very dangerous unless you let them pile up, so as long as your DPS switch to these guys, it's going to be a really easy fight. On the way to the third boss, you're going to find a magma-looking worm, who I guess is a mini-boss. He doesn't drop anything, but it is kind of fun just for a couple seconds. It's really easy, but I miss having mini-bosses in dungeons. They definitely add to the experience. They make it feel more alive. At least that's how I feel. Once you make it to the bridge, you find Roll Tall, another elemental boss. This fight is visually really awesome, but mechanically fairly uninteresting, at least for melee and tanks. I think ranged and healers have a lot more going on. The boss is stationary, so as a tank you just kinda stand there and DPS him. His main ability is Fiery Boulder, which summons a giant meteor that rolls down the bridge. It spawns in melee, but you have a lot of time to move out of the big flaming circle, so just move out of it. Ranged also have to dodge as it rolls down the bridge. After he does that, he does this Heat Wave ability, which will push the group back, kinda like G-Kun, but it does an AoE pulse of damage, so healers need to probably pop a cooldown there, because it does do quite a bit. And near the end, he'll light the bridge on fire, which does more AoE damage. Basically, this is the most healing-intensive fight in the dungeon, but it's really boring as a tank and as a melee DPS. I kinda wish he wasn't stationary. It'd be a lot more interesting if you could move him around. The trash just before the last boss is made up of Ogron and a pack of Ogre Flame Casters. The Ogron didn't seem to do much, but the casters are actually a bit interesting. So they use an ability where they channel flames in a certain direction, and when you have 4 of them on you, it can actually be kinda tricky to avoid. The problem here is that the damage was so low, I could just stand in it with no problem. Like, I was taking around 1500 a tick, which felt like nothing. My health was like, I don't know, nearly 200k. And they also have an interruptible ability called Erupting Flames, which summons a really cool looking fireball on the ground, so you need to resist the urge to stand in it, even though it looks awesome, but it doesn't do any damage if you don't stand in it. I assume on higher difficulties that this pull is going to be actually pretty fun, but on normal it felt a little bit undertuned. The final boss of the dungeon is gug'rokk, and he has some interesting mechanics. His main ability is called Molten Blast, which is just a casted nuke that can be interrupted. If you don't interrupt it, he gets a stack of Molten Core, which increases his damage by 10%, and this stacks up to 3 times. When it gets to 3 stacks, he casts Molten Barrage, which does a big AoE damage pulse to your group. Now the Molten Core stacks can be purged, so definitely do that if you're the healer. It'll help the group a lot, and it's probably going to be pretty important on higher difficulties. Or you could just interrupt Molten Blast, which serves the same purpose essentially. The biggest effect visually is called Magma Eruption. So this will put lava pools under everyone's location, and they seem to last for the whole fight. On normal, he dies quick enough that you have a good amount of space left over, but on heroic, this could probably fill the whole room easily. My guess is the best way to deal with this is probably going to be having everyone stack up when he's about to cast, and then putting all the pools in one clump, and then spreading out again. His final ability summons an elemental that runs to a furnace on the side of the room. If you don't kill it before it reaches it, there's an AoE pulse that does a reasonable amount of damage, so just make sure to have DPS switch to it. It's pretty easy to see. There's a big fire line where it's going, so just have DPS switch to it and you should have no issues. Overall, Bloodmaul Slag Mines is a great introductory dungeon. As far as intro dungeons go, things like Utgard Keep, Bloodmaul, Temple of the Jade Serpent, they're usually pretty good, and they try to capture the theme they're going for, and I definitely get that vibe here. It captures that savageness that they want, and I like it a lot. I can see how on heroic it's going to pose a big challenge, and on normal it feels fairly easy, but that's kind of how it's to be expected. Pandaria dungeons were really garbage, but this reminds me a lot of Cataclysm dungeons, like I said, Blackrock Caverns, and even though everyone loves to hate on Cataclysm, the best part of the expansion was the dungeons, and I'm really hoping the dungeons in Warlords are just as good. Anyway, that's all from me for now. If you enjoyed the video or found it informative, please leave a like, subscribe for more, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.